Next up, we have Ashton Pike, who is the Editorial Director of BizBash Connect Meetings. And Ashton will be interviewing Liron David, the owner at Eventique. I will let you two go to it. I know it's going to be an amazing interview. And let me get on.
Hi, Liron. How are you today?
Hi, good to see you.
It's nice to chat with you virtually.
I know. Soon enough, hopefully in real life again.
Yes, I need to get to New York ASAP. I've heard about the entire reopening, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, no, lots of action going on, so very excited.
Well, thanks so much to EVENTICON for having us today. We're very excited. So I'll jump right in. So talking about, customer engagement or lack thereof, to be honest, in virtual events is a really hot topic in the industry right now, especially amongst planners, as we're moving toward live events, but they're becoming hybrid. So you still have that virtual audience to engage. So we're at this pivotal point in the industry. What do you think the future of our events looks like between virtual events, live events, and hybrid events? And how much weight should we even be putting on virtual events as we move forward?
So I think it's really the first question is a matter of like, who's the audience and who's the host, right? So what is the goal of the engagement? And obviously everybody from at this point, and not looking back too far on the pandemic, but we've all been there with the virtual events, right? Whether we've struggled to produce them or whether we've struggled to attend them, in every scenario, I think everybody's onboarded on the virtual side, and it's a comfort level up to the point of we're finding that you don't even need to attend meetings anymore to do deals, right? You can just join a Zoom and meet virtually, and it's very much acceptable. So the question is going to be, as we move to the next stage of opening and also looking back on what we've learned over the last year, is going to be what is the engagement that we're looking for the audience that we're hoping to engage, and is the only way to make it a live experience that's in person, or is the virtual aspect something that is still so important because of the reach, right? And maybe the virtual audience gets something that the in-person audience does not get, right? So thinking about the strategy behind who the audience is and how we're trying to tell that story and keep them engaged is going to determine, I think, which direction you lean on. Is it more virtual of an audience and less in person, or is it more in person and smaller virtual? But I don't think virtual is going away ever. I think in every capacity, it's going to be around, and it's going to stay, and it's still going to be strong for engagement. But you really need to think about it in two separate approaches. It can't just be one approach and let's just open it up to everybody in every capacity.
Yeah, excellent points. And I couldn't agree more. The virtual definitely isn't going anywhere. We're on a virtual event today. As people come back into live, auditoriums and trade show floors, you always have that virtual element going on. And at this point, I think planners have realized the benefits to virtual events. At first, I feel like planners that were new to virtual events, we were like, oh man, I don't want to do this. I would miss live events, which we all did. But at the same time, I think over time, we started to realize those benefits to it, which is it is more inclusive. You can get a wider audience. Sometimes it can be cost effective depending on what you're doing with your virtual side of it. So all very excellent points. Well, Eventique has spent more than a year producing virtual events at this point through the pandemic. Can you walk us through the trajectory of that timeline, what it looked like, and how your events evolved over the pandemic?
Yeah, we are, as event producers, and to all the event producers out there, we're all solution oriented, right? We have to come up with really creative solutions on the spot with not much time to prepare, because in a live event, you have to approach it that way, right? Otherwise, you're going to get stuck. So when going backwards again on beginning of the pandemic, we were fortunate enough to say, okay, we have events that are booked on the calendar. We don't want to lose the experience and the engagement with those customers and their attendees. So we went for it and said, okay, we're going to push to virtual. What does virtual really mean? We didn't know at the time, but we knew that we know how to engage an audience. So we took the same approach and we said, okay, what's the basics of technology that is not going to be a barrier of entry, and an overbearing challenge with a timeline of an event that's weeks out after the lockdown, or a month and a half out after the lockdown, and how do we continue keeping that event on the calendar? And so it started with basics of using Vimeo, right, and live streaming, and we've done live streaming for a long time, so that wasn't new to us. but what does the engagement look like when you're not just staring at a screen watching a pre-recorded playback or a live stream of a conversation? And we looked at, okay, well, do they want to chat with each other? Do they want, we didn't look into all these virtual platforms that have been around for many, many years. They were always there, just no one really knew about them. Yeah. And so in the beginning it was, let's get the basics done. Let's get the communications from point A to point B. And once we've got that, once we've overcome that from a technology perspective, now let's add on the interactive element. How are these people communicating? Are they just chatting? Are they able to go into one-on-one video meetings? Are they getting a swag pack that now they're sharing that experience on social media? What does that drive back to the event so that people feel like they're not alone? And that became our next focus, was like, how do we make sure that people don't feel that they're just by themselves at home in the back of their bedroom or basement or wherever they're tuning in from, and feeling like they really don't have a way to engage with the other attendees and guests. And so that became our focus. And we said, okay, well, now that we figured that out, from whether it's video engagement or chat or swag box, now the fact of just looking at people in a box like we are today, right? Is that enough? Right? That gets old. It's Zoom fatigue, everyone wants to call it. So then we said, well, we have to build something that's going to put us above our competition and above and bring us to the next level, and not just be a Band-Aid. So we took all our resources and put them all together, and we built a 3D interactive virtual event platform. So for us, that was the next way to create a rendered environment that took you out of your bedroom or living room or basement. And now you had this beautiful, compound on an island, and it took you out of that headspace, and now you can engage with different areas within that compound and move around and meet new people throughout the space. And that was what we found was a big, a game changer for us in terms of brand voice, visuals, messaging, journey, storytelling, and that was a better way to storytell than just people speaking, on screen. So that's where we moved into.
You came a long way, for sure. You went from, what are we really doing, to, oh, we got this, we'll build our own platform.
Yes.
And the platform's amazing. We've written about it on BizBash and Connect for, y'all did the TikTok Casa Familia. That was such a cool event. And inside the platform it looks almost like it's XR. It's very clear. It's very realistic. When you were building out the platform, what went into it in terms of engagement? So what were like your priorities? Like, we have to make sure we have this feature where we've noticed it's become popular and it's interactive and it gets people, communicating with the platform, but also with others. What stood out as top priority?
Number one, making sure it was easy to get access to, because if you can't make it in, you're lost. And obviously the support chat, goes crazy. But that was our first barrier, making sure people could get access. Next up was the ability to chat across the platform with anybody and see who was attending. Because if it's just a generic chat box on the side of a video playback, it's not enough to understand who is attending and who do you want to meet and who do you want to interact with. So being able to do that and build profiles for individual attendees was the next level of importance. Photo booths, there's always a great photo booth experience that we always feel is important, especially when it comes to the social media engagement. And then the next important part for our clients was figuring out how to measure the KPIs, right? And seeing like, what was the journey that we were hoping all guests would go through? Did that actually happen? Did they go from point 1 to 2 to 3, and how long did they stay at each location? So that became our third most important focus, was how do we track that engagement? Not just make sure people watched, but did they interact with what we hoped and wanted them to interact with?
Yeah. And from the attendee side, that networking has proved to be huge in terms of, I wish walking into a live event that I had a roster, almost like you go into like a sports stadium, you have a roster of who's there, who you want to talk to, and you can just go meet up with them. And that's a big benefit of virtual event platforms like yours, is you can easily sift through, almost like you're just scrolling through, and speed date a little bit among your professions. And then from the client perspective, those KPIs, I feel like, allow event planners and organizers to develop an even better virtual event the next go around. Maybe they didn't reach their target audience, but they met a new audience they didn't even realize they were attracting. And that, I just feel like the virtual world and companies like you that have moved into creating your own platforms have really like pushed this industry forward. So it's incredible. I love talking about it. So from all the virtual events posted on your platform, what event would you say acted as a good example of virtual engagement? And you can explain, the type of event it was, how big the audience it is, because obviously that does play a factor. And then, what about an event where the expectations were a little underwhelming?
So we just did 2 events, one for Sony and one for NBC, where we redesigned their studio spaces. So we rebuilt and rendered out parts of their street on their studio lots to almost bring back the fact of going to those physical spaces and exploring the talent, which you really don't have access to the talent in a physical live way of being able to walk into a studio. So redesigning that in a virtual space and being able to go and engage with the talent in these different studios, I thought was a really great way to bring to life something that you cannot get in real life. And that was something really cool from a virtual perspective. And those were for thousands and thousands. I mean, over 10,000 attendees that are going into that space and taking those tours and meeting the talent. A huge win, a huge win. When it comes to things that fell a little bit flat, I mean, I'm not going to mention a specific client name, but I think the KPIs, like not being aligned in the beginning, and also, decision-making factors that go into building out a virtual event, right? And if you're not familiar with how to measure what that success looks like, it can look really nice, but you really don't know what your message is. And I think the story has to be defined. Then you can build an environment and a strategy to match that goal. And then you have to measure and make sure that it works in real time and in real life, whether it's virtual or live. So falling flat is always a matter of not aligning the strategy with the goals and not having real goals ahead of time. Besides, we want to engage everybody and as many people as we can, whether it's consumer or B2B, you've got to have a really targeted goal when it comes to virtual. Otherwise, it's just too open-ended and you can't measure the success. So going through those is really important in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't know what you're going to do on the front end, how can you get that deal on the back end?
That's right.
And I feel like that's a common problem at this point, just because, especially clients that are new to the virtual world at this point, like you said, a lot of event organizers are used to virtual. It's second nature to you guys at this point, but not so much the clients. They haven't necessarily switched to virtual. And so how do you feel an event organizer could help guide their client if the organizer feels that the client's KPIs aren't necessarily reflective of their event, and then they're not going to get that data they really want on the back end of it?
In terms of how to guide to the right direction for producing a successful virtual event, if they don't have the goals and the KPIs lined up? Is that was the question, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
So I would go more simple than complicated with the rollout of the virtual experience, which means maybe you put more effort into a swag pack, right? That's going to make people feel like they got something tangible, whereas the program doesn't have to be as intense of a design from a virtual perspective. Because at the end of the day, the more people register to get their swag box, the more you can you have a touch point with them that's staying with them in their physical universe, versus something that ends in the virtual one once the program is over. And I think, the more touch points and follow-ups you can have, if you don't have those KPIs lined up and those goals for what is the engagement we want to the virtual experience, I would stick with something more tangible and put your money there and produce a simpler virtual concept, rather than trying to overdo or overcomplicate the content that needs to be shared. And there's only so much patience people have to watch, something online. And at this point, especially, we're all a little bit over it, and we want to meet back in real life.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. And I noticed we have some questions coming in from the audience. I did want to say to our viewers watching right now, in about 7-ish minutes, we're going to be taking some more questions from our chat box. If you want to use the chat function on the right side of your screen, you can send in some questions and we'll address those in a few minutes. So Liron, to close us out before taking those questions, what is your advice for clients in our audience today when it comes to planning a virtual event? We've already kept, keep it aligned. You have to make sure your goals are aligned. But what else would you add to that?
I think that there are a ton of new virtual platforms, and we've seen obviously the amount of venture capital money that's been going into a lot of the virtual tools and platforms that are out there. I think that as we continue the virtual space continues to grow, because it's not going to go down. It's just going to become more innovative in the approach of how to become a real hybrid model. That's not going to be too costly of an endeavor that a company is going to say, well, we can't afford both, right? So like, what does that hybrid model really look like? And I think that the future of the virtual side moving forward is going to be like really fine tune. I can't say it enough. Like fine tune that strategy, like fine tune the story. Technology exists and it's going to continue to grow. But we have virtual events going into next year, only virtual events, for many of our clients outside who are the ones who are coming back live. And we're asking the why, right? Even more, because that we have to challenge the client to invest in the why just as much, not just because we have to engage. Because is not enough of a reason. We have to ask why and really challenge them to determine what those goals are. And is a virtual route the right route? Or is it, is there another way to engage their audiences? Is there a bigger festival that's coming up or a trade show that they could be a part of? And I think we're also going to see, we've seen it now with the live events coming back, where it's a much more targeted audience. It's not just come one, come all in a company or, to an industry anymore. It's really specified, targeted audiences who are being invited, and people are taking much more care with who they are interacting with and how much time they're spending and money to interact with that, potential partner or consumer or, or client. And I think the same approach is going to be on the virtual side. You could post something on social media and it goes viral, but I don't think a virtual event is going to go viral. I just don't think so. I think, you got to pick your right audience. But for some businesses, the more audiences globally they can reach, virtual really gives them a great tool to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every time so far when we've chatted with event planners and just production agencies on their virtual events, their hybrid events for stories for BizBash or Connect, we're asking them, what's been the biggest takeaway from here? And a lot of them say we had no idea the reach we could get. A live event that used to pull in 2,000 is pulling in 20,000 globally, which I think is really incredible. And so they can really expand that reach and expand, their brand, expand your brand's awareness. So that's really incredible about virtual events. We have one question from the audience on the topic of swag boxes that keep coming up. They asked, are swag boxes going to become all the more critical as we move forward?
Absolutely. I think swag boxes are not just a gift to engage the consumer or your audience. We're seeing it now with companies just giving out more swag to their own employees, right? Or to their own circles, because it's that tangible asset that we haven't had in way too long we're a year plus at this point without something really tangible, right? So the first touch point being, a tangible item is, as long as it's creative and meaningful and useful and not just another tchotchke that just has a logo on it, really think about what's going to be meaningful to the audience. And I think that's a huge takeaway, and it's also an added value to the virtual attendee who's not coming in real life. The real life attendee has the food, the beverage, the lights, the experience. The virtual attendee needs something to make it valuable for them besides just logging in and watching, a main stage live stream. And that virtual swag box, I think, is the way to do it.
Absolutely. I've gotten a few virtual swag boxes over the past year. Some of them I was like, how do they get my apartment address? But either way, I was still really excited to receive. And it's a way to engage that virtual audience, especially if they're solely virtual. It's not like a hub and spoke thing. And like you said, the live audience gets everything now. So if it's a hybrid event, I would also, just from an editor's perspective, encourage you, from the planners I've been talking to, they're sending their virtual audience something. And especially at this point, there are tons of like meal delivery options that you can send, which I think are really cool too. And so a second user asked, how do you send virtual swag and do you think it works? I can add a note there of tons of really cool places that you can order swag from and send through. We did it for our in-person event, and in Vegas, we used Gift Suite. So that's just one of the many that are out there. And not to do a plug, but you can go to BizBash and search up a bunch of them. We have them rounded up on there. A lot of companies you can utilize. And if you search virtual, swag bags, I'm sure you're also set to get something. But Liron, do you have any, swag companies off the top of your mind that you could suggest?
There's a ton of swag companies. Swagware is one that we're working with. We're always looking for like individual items that are just really, really cool. We always focus even our holiday gifts on trying to find something really meaningful and cool that someone hasn't, gotten before. We've done from the electric, coffee mugs that keep your coffee hot, because everyone knows especially if you have kids, you can't finish a hot cup of coffee in one sitting in the morning, especially when you're on the phone, also when you get to work, down to those like, the massages, for your neck and for your back, the little, machines that everybody sees online, but they don't know where to get it and what kind. So we're always looking for like, great concepts. I just want to go back to one thing on hybrid events. When you're doing a real hybrid event and you have a large virtual audience, you need to make sure that the show that the virtual audience is tuning into is not just a camera facing the stage. You need to show audience reactions. You need to show emotions. You need to show reactions. You need to make the virtual audience feel, again, that they can laugh when they're seeing an audience laugh, right? And that is a very important part of a hybrid experience. So don't just stick a camera back in the back of the room. Have 3 cameras and show the reactions. That's the most important part, I find, for what a real hybrid event is going to look like.
Agreed. And I know a few event planners I've spoken to recently have, compared being a virtual attendee to watching the Super Bowl. Have you ever attended the Super Bowl? Most people are like, no. Have you watched the Super Bowl? They're like, well, yes. And so there are ways to create a at-home experience that is worthwhile and very exciting. And on the topic of swag, I remember from one story, this company, I think it was HBO Max, sent a microphone, which was really cool. It was a karaoke microphone, and they had that as part of their karaoke at the end of one of their virtual events for a virtual premiere. So like Liron said, there's tons of really cool things you can do to incorporate your virtual attendee from home that is specific to your event, and it's not just your typical, like a t-shirt with a brand on it or a water bottle that you're just going to put in a cabinet.
No, totally. And we also there's a bunch of virtual swag vendors on myeventbox.com, which is also a marketplace. Lots of fun things there for events, but a ton of swag ideas on there too. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask you about that. I was going to say, don't you have, isn't My Event Box one of your creations, one of your brainchilds?
Yes. So as a producer, as a planner, we've always been challenged with sourcing, locally, but also nationally, wherever we travel for innovative products and services from vetted vendors. And we all end up on Google, we end up on Instagram, we end up on Pinterest, but there's no way to really get to the direct vendor to transact with them. So we built My Event Box as a tool for planners to be able to source and transact, and pricing is listed, photos, lots of information that usually you're waiting on for days to get back from just a generic inquiry once you even find the vendor you're looking for. So yeah, myeventbox.com. Check it out. We love your feedback. Anybody who's tuning in, we welcome it. And yeah, so it's a very exciting time, especially now that we're coming back live.
That's very cool. So we've touched on a ton of attendee engagement that works, and we know that just setting up camera in the back of an auditorium doesn't work. What else do you feel you've seen, like you've tried and it just didn't work in terms of engaging that audience, and you just feel like event organizers shouldn't not necessarily waste their time on, because it could just depend on their event, but maybe it's not just the most efficient method to engage the audience?
When it comes to virtual events, right? I would not overdo the amount of interviews and content that goes into a virtual show. I would rather tune into a shorter show than something that's just there's way too much content to take in. And to me, that would be my advising, is just less content but more meaningful content, and try not to fit everything in to one show. It's too overwhelming for an audience to take in. While we might find it meaningful to get a lot in a short amount of time, I would rather see something really meaningful for to tune into. So great content, but less, and stretch it out. Make a schedule. Engage your audience more often and more touch points, but with more meaningful content in a timely manner than just over more than 45 minutes. Way too much. Big mistake.
Absolutely. And BizBash, we just learned that from our first hybrid event back in May. I say back in May, it was a month ago. It feels like forever ago. Our first hybrid event, first thing we learned is, these long form education sessions have really worked for our live in-person attendees, not so much for our hybrid attendees. And when you have like 1,500 attendees to attend to, you have to be wary of that. So for our next event in Tampa, we're definitely cutting it down to like 20-minute TED Talk style events. And yeah, that was our biggest takeaway. So that was a really great point. Well, Liron, it was really great to talk with you today, and I can see Karen is jumping back in.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. It was so fun.
It was so great, and I have to say I'm never opposed to swag in any of its many forms. I'm all about the great swag, the Hollywood events. I mean, who doesn't love a good swag attack? So yes, and I will check out that company that you mentioned, Liron, because I think so many businesses need great swag. And it does leave that tangible or just that extra branding, which is always really fun. So thank you both to have the both of you are both, so well versed in what you do, and it's so interesting. So thank you both for attending and sharing your insight. We will, of course, follow up and send everyone all the details to follow up in the many different directions. So thank you again.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.